snobby car salesman refuses to serve simple woman. Her billionaire husband's arrival shocks him. The woman walked into the showroom, her steps deliberate but quiet, her modest clothes in stark contrast to the polished luxury surrounding her. The salesman, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, glanced at her and immediately drew his conclusions. Her worn jacket, the simple shoes, and the lack of the flash of designer accessories screamed, out of place. He straightened his posture and gave her a practiced smile, already deciding how to handle this transaction. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a bit too smooth, as though rehearsed for moments like this. She nodded, glancing at the gleaming sports car in the center of the showroom, the chrome reflecting an almost arrogant brilliance. Her eyes softened as she approached the car, her fingers trailing along the polished surface. She didn't seem intimidated, but instead fascinated by the craftsmanship. "Just looking," she said softly, almost as if to herself, though the salesman took it as an invitation to take charge. He leaned in slightly, his tone turning a shade patronizing. "You might want to try something more your speed, something a bit more practical. Maybe the sedans over there." He gestured to a section of the showroom where more common vehicles sat, far less expensive, far less flashy. The woman's gaze remained fixed on the car, her expression neutral, but there was a quiet resistance in her stillness. She didn't respond immediately, her mind calculating the weight of his words, the assumptions in his voice. She wasn't upset, but she knew she had already been reduced to a stereotype in his eyes. The type of person who wandered into a place like this for a moment of fantasy, only to be sent away with nothing more than a look of mild amusement from the staff. The salesman, sensing the silence, smirked as though he'd won. "You know," he added, his voice now dipping into a condescending whisper, "there's no shame in having modest tastes. Some of the most beautiful cars are within reach, but, well, let's just say it's not about dreams today, is it?" Still, she remained calm. Her fingers now rested on the door handle of the car, her touch almost reverent. There was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. She wasn't angry, wasn't reacting to his dismissiveness. She simply refused to let his words change the course of her thoughts. The salesman waited for a reaction, any sign of frustration, but there was none. Just silence. And then, for a moment, he saw something shift in her eyes, though it was hard to place. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was something deeper, something he had misread entirely. "Well, ma'am," he said with a grin, "if you're just looking, let me know if you need anything else." He stepped away, already, turning to attend to someone else who seemed more worthy of his attention. The woman's quiet resolve remained unshaken. She remained by the car, the weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing into the silence. The salesman returned a few minutes later, his approach no longer casual, but now laced with a hint of condescension. The woman still stood by the sports car, unmoved, her fingers brushing the sleek body of the vehicle, as though it were a memory rather than a possession she could claim. The salesman couldn't help but feel a slight irritation. The woman's continued presence, her quiet insistence on staying, seemed to mock him. He approached her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Are you sure this is the one you want?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp. "I mean, it's a lot of car for someone who probably doesn't know the first thing about performance vehicles. You might want to look at something with a bit more modesty." She didn't react immediately. Her eyes remained on the car, but the weight of his words settled in her chest. She had heard them all before, in different forms. "It's not about the car," she replied quietly, her voice calm but steady. "Isn't it, though?" he pressed, moving closer, his voice growing more insistent. "People like you, they come in, dreaming big, but they leave with something that's more their level." He gestured vaguely toward the cheaper cars lined up in the showroom, the ones that actually fit your lifestyle. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her, but she refused to let them in. She refused to let them define her. It wasn't just the car that mattered. It was what it represented. The judgment, the dismissal, the assumption that she could not afford it, that she didn't belong here. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice still, gentle but now tinged with something deeper, a quiet strength. "And neither does this car," the salesman chuckled, an empty sound that carried no humor. "I'm just saying, you don't want to waste your time. You look like someone who would appreciate something more practical." He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the room, for other customers, as if to subtly indicate that others were far more deserving of his attention. The woman didn't flinch, didn't falter. There was a soft, almost imperceptible shift in her posture as she straightened, a fraction of a degree. The energy around her changed, a quiet resistance building in the space between them. She wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to prove anything. But the more he pressed, the more he misunderstood her, the more her calmness became a defiance in itself. "Practicality isn't the only thing that matters," she said softly, turning to face him fully. "Maybe what I need isn't your approval." Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "Maybe what I need is just to be seen for who I am, not what you think I should be." For a moment, the salesman's grin faltered, and he stepped back. He hadn't expected this. The woman was still just a speck on his radar, a fleeting interaction he could easily dismiss. But there was something in the way she spoke, the quiet power in her words, that unsettled him. Her calmness was becoming more piercing, more difficult to ignore. Around them, the other customers in the showroom shifted, some catching the subtle tension between them. A few exchanged knowing glances, some offering sympathetic looks to the woman, but none of them intervened. They too were spectators, watching the dance of assumptions and prejudices unfold. But the woman didn't care about the eyes on her. She had long ago stopped caring about what others thought of her. The words the salesman threw at her no longer carried weight. They were nothing but air, meant to distract her, to deflect her from the real conversation she needed to have. One with herself. She could hear the murmurings of the people around her, the soft chuckles, the dismissive tones, but she kept her focus on the car in front of her. His words cut, yes, but not as deeply as they once might have. She had lived with the weight of judgment for years, and it had not broken her. If anything, it had made her stronger. The salesman didn't see it. He couldn't. His arrogance blinded him to the woman standing before him, someone whose presence was more formidable than he had imagined. He chuckled once more, shaking his head as if to brush her off. "I'll let you think about it. Take your time," he said, his tone dripping with a patronizing kindness. He turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the showroom. The woman watched him leave, the last of his dismissive words hanging in the air like a faint odor she could not escape. She wasn't sure if he would remember her face tomorrow, or even if he'd remember this encounter at all, but it didn't matter. She didn't need his approval. What mattered was that she was here. What mattered was that she had shown up, regardless of the assumptions others placed on her. And in that moment, her quiet defiance was enough. The woman stood in front of the car, her fingers lightly tracing the curves of the sleek exterior, lost in thought. The salesman, having circled back to her for the third time, was growing increasingly impatient. His smile had faded, replaced by a strained expression as he once again tried to steer her away from the luxury vehicle. "Ma'am, I really think you should reconsider," he began, his voice tight, though he kept the mask of professionalism in place. "This is a serious investment. A car like this isn't for everyone. It requires maintenance, a certain lifestyle that—" "I'm not here to waste time," she interrupted, her voice steady but carrying an edge now. "I've made my decision." The salesman scoffed, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "You're not seriously thinking of buying this, are you? I can show you a great deal on something more suitable," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You could drive away today with a very practical model, something a bit more manageable." His hand waved dismissively toward the far corner of the showroom, where a line of more affordable cars stood. The woman's eyes didn't leave the car. She felt the sting of his words, the implications of what he believed her to be, but she stood firm. He had underestimated her from the start, believing her nothing more than a fleeting fantasy. In a showroom designed for the elite, "You don't know anything about me," she replied quietly, but her voice carried strength, each word deliberate. The tension between them thickened, a silent battle waging in the space between them. He tried to brush it off, but she could see his discomfort now. Her calmness unnerved him more than her words ever could. "Look," he said, moving closer with the air of a man who was both trying to convince himself and her. "This car," he gestured at the high-end vehicle, "is just not meant for someone like you. Trust me, it's better to get something you can handle." There was a glint of superiority in his eyes now, the kind that said he had the upper hand. The woman's lips tightened into a subtle but resolute line. She took a deep breath and let the weight of the moment settle in. His assumptions were becoming too much to bear, too much to ignore. She didn't respond immediately, but her silence spoke volumes. The salesman misread it, thinking she might be reconsidering, softening. "I know it's a lot to process," he continued, "but you'll thank me in the long run when you realize—" "I don't need your advice," she cut him off, her voice calm but forceful. "I'm here to buy what I want, not what you think I should have." He faltered, taken aback by her confidence, but he quickly regained composure, trying to assert control. "Don't be hasty. I've been doing this for years. Trust me, there's no shame in knowing your limits." The woman straightened her back, the small but powerful shift in her posture reflecting a change in the air. She had remained silent for too long, allowing him to feed her the narrative of inadequacy. But now, there was a stillness in her that made her appear untouchable. "I know exactly what I want," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "And it's this car." The salesman's mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the one he reserved for those he believed were too naive to understand. "If you say so," he sneered, and walked away with a mocking laugh, muttering under his breath, "Let's see how long that lasts." But this time, the woman didn't flinch. She felt a quiet surge of strength inside her, one she had kept hidden for too long. His dismissive words didn't sting like they used to. They only fueled her determination. The longer he tried to belittle her, the clearer it became to her that this moment was about more than a car. It was about respect, her right to be seen for who she truly was. And as she stood there, the power, dynamics in the room shifted. No longer was she the passive recipient of judgment. She had chosen to stand her ground, to refuse the identity he had tried to impose on her. She glanced at him once more, her eyes cool but resolute. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was something far more potent. She wasn't asking for his approval anymore. She was showing him that her worth was not defined by his assumptions or anyone else's. The salesman, now realizing that his charm and dismissive tactics weren't working, scowled before walking off in frustration, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The rest of the customers in the showroom, still observing, exchanged subtle glances, some with newfound respect for the woman who had faced down the salesman's arrogance without flinching. She didn't care about their approval either. The only approval she sought was her own. The quiet strength that had started to surface now became her anchor. She was no longer invisible. The salesman had been busy with another client, keeping a wide distance from the woman who had, against all his expectations, remained unshaken. He thought he had won. Thought he had made it clear she didn't belong here. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden, unmistakable sound of an engine pulling up. Loud, powerful, and unmistakably familiar. He paused, glancing out the showroom's large windows just in time to see a sleek black car glide to a stop. The woman didn't turn. She remained focused, standing tall beside the luxury vehicle she had admired from the start. The salesman, however, felt the tension in the air shift. His confidence wavered, a subtle ripple in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite place. Then the door opened, and the man who stepped out was a striking figure. Tall, authoritative, dressed with effortless sophistication. His presence was undeniable, commanding. He strode into the showroom, his eyes scanning the space briefly before landing on his wife. The woman, still beside the car, turned toward him, the faintest smile playing on her lips. Her demeanor was composed, calm, but now something else, something more powerful, radiated from her. The salesman, momentarily thrown, couldn't help but stare. He recognized the man now, and his breath caught. This wasn't just any client. This was someone whose influence reached far beyond the glossy walls of the dealership. "Is everything all right here?" The husband's voice was smooth but carried an edge of authority, one that seemed to stop time in its tracks. The woman nodded gently. The salesman, his face flushing with realization, stammered, I was just showing your wife some of our more practical options." The husband didn't react, but the air around them thickened. The woman, standing tall now, her posture strong, finally broke the silence. "Practical," she repeated, her voice steady, each word measured. "Funny, that's not what I've been told about this place. You see, I was actually interested in something a little more exclusive." Her eyes locked with the salesman's. "I've been told that the cars here are for people who know what they're doing. I guess I'm a little surprised that you didn't think I would be capable of that." The salesman blinked, his arrogance crumbling before his eyes. He shifted on his feet, discomfort creeping into his posture, but he refused to let go of his pretense. "I'm sure we can find something within your range," he began, but the husband cut him off. "I don't think that's what my wife wants, and I'm sure it's not what she deserves," he said, his voice hardening. The salesman's gaze flicked to him, and then to the woman, his mind racing. "She deserves respect," the husband continued. "Something you clearly don't seem to understand." He took a step forward, standing beside his wife, his presence completing her quiet strength. There was a finality to his words, and the salesman felt the weight of them. His smile had long since faded, replaced by a look of panic. The woman's voice was calm but now laced with a controlled fury. "You assumed I couldn't afford this car. You assumed I didn't belong here. You made me small in your eyes, and in doing so, you tried to make me small in my own." The salesman stammered again, trying to backtrack, but the words caught in his throat. "You didn't just misjudge me," she continued. "You judged everyone like me. But it's not my judgment that matters today, it's yours." She paused, the words sinking in, then added, "I'm not just someone who comes into your showroom to look at cars. You've just been talking to someone who owns half of your dealership's top-tier cars, and didn't even bat an eye at the thought of walking away." She gave him a long, steady look, before turning to her husband with a faint, knowing smile. The realization hit the salesman with the force of a hammer. His eyes widened, his face going pale as he processed the words that had just been spoken. This wasn't a woman out of her depth. This was a woman who had quietly watched his assumptions unfold, biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to expose them. The tension between the salesman and the couple was palpable now. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The salesman, once dismissive and condescending, was now the one who stood vulnerable. His earlier confidence, rooted in his assumptions, had been torn apart in a matter of minutes. The woman turned to her husband, her eyes softening, the conflict within her finally giving way to the strength she had concealed. "We're done here," she said simply, the finality of her words a signal to the salesman that there was no longer any room for negotiation. The husband nodded. "Let's go," he said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. There was no need for any more words. The salesman stood frozen as they turned and walked toward the exit, leaving him with nothing but the lingering echoes of his own misplaced arrogance. The woman's steps were measured and calm, her power now fully realized. She had confronted the assumptions, the dismissiveness, and she had walked away with dignity, not needing to prove anything to anyone anymore. As they reached the door, she glanced back one last time. The salesman, his face flushed with humiliation, watched her go, and in that moment, everything changed, for both of them. As the woman and her husband walked through the dealership's doors, The world outside seemed quieter, more distant. The weight of the moment, the silent confrontation, hung in the air. The salesman's shocked expression still lingered in her mind, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was just the last piece of the puzzle falling into place, a stark reminder of how easily assumptions could be shattered. They walked side by side, the quiet strength of the moment settling between them. The husband's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a simple gesture of support, but it spoke volumes. She glanced up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and newfound understanding. They didn't need words to communicate in this moment. They had both been through something deeper than a mere exchange of pleasantries. "You handled that better than I expected," he said softly, his voice warm but filled with admiration. He wasn't just speaking about the confrontation, he was speaking about her, how she had carried herself, how she had defied every expectation. She smiled, though there was a quiet weight in her eyes. "I didn't expect it either, but it was time." Her voice carried a quiet confidence now, one that had been building for years, but had only fully bloomed in that brief but powerful moment in the showroom. It wasn't about the car anymore. It wasn't even about the salesman. It was about her. It was about finally claiming her space, her voice, and her strength in a world that had always tried to define her by superficial standards. They reached the car, the same one the salesman had tried to dismiss so easily. As they slid into the vehicle, the weight of her actions finally sank in. She wasn't just leaving the dealership behind. She was leaving behind every preconception that had ever been placed upon her. Every glance, every whispered judgment, every time someone had assumed she was too small, too insignificant to matter. Those were the things she was leaving in the dust. "Do you think he'll change?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with the question that had been lingering in her mind since the moment the salesman had been exposed. It wasn't a question for her husband alone. It was a question for herself, too. "Maybe," he said after a moment. "But it doesn't really matter anymore, does it?" She looked at him, and for the first time, she realized how true those words were. It didn't matter what the salesman thought. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. The only thing that mattered was her own understanding of herself. The journey they had just taken, the journey from dismissal to defiance, from silence to strength, wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was enough, that her worth wasn't defined by others' judgments. It was a quiet, powerful victory that would continue to resonate long after they drove away from the dealership. As they drove off, the road ahead felt brighter, more expansive. The woman sat back in her seat, the hum of the car beneath her a soothing reminder of the power she had just unlocked. She wasn't just a passenger in her own life anymore. She was in the driver's seat, taking control of her narrative, her worth, her voice. And as they left the dealership, she felt something inside her settle, something solid, something permanent. She had won, not just against the salesman, but against every assumption ever made about her. She had earned the respect she deserved, and in that, she had found her freedom. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look or felt, the weight of judgment placed on you based on your background, know you're not alone. Share your story below, and let's keep this conversation going. We all have the power to break free from labels and rise above them. Don't forget to subscribe. For more stories of strength, empowerment, and change,